To truly understand the full scope of Totò Riina's life and the impact he had on Sicily, Italy, and the world, we must immerse ourselves even deeper into the details of his life, the world he shaped, and the legacy he left behind. The story of Totò Riina is not just about a single man, but about an entire system of power, fear, and control that he both exploited and exemplified. Totò Riina was born into a world of poverty on November 16, 1930, in Corleone, a small village in Sicily. At the time of his birth, Sicily was a land scarred by centuries of foreign domination, economic exploitation, and deep-seated social inequalities. The island's economy was primarily agrarian, with vast estates owned by a small elite who controlled the wealth and resources, while the majority of the population, including Riina's family, lived in extreme poverty. These harsh conditions bred resentment, anger, and a sense of hopelessness among the Sicilian peasantry, laying the groundwork for the emergence of the Mafia as a parallel power structure that could offer protection, enforce contracts, and provide a form of rough justice in a lawless land. Riina's early life was steeped in this environment of deprivation and struggle. His father, Giovanni Riina, worked as a farmer, toiling under the hot Sicilian sun to scrape out a living for his family. But despite his efforts, the family often went hungry. In these early years, young Totò learned some hard lessons: that the world was an unforgiving place, that survival required not just hard work but also cunning, and that sometimes, the only way to get ahead was to break the rules. These lessons would stay with him throughout his life and would shape his future as one of the most ruthless figures in the history of organized crime. In 1943, tragedy struck the Riina family when Totò was just 13 years old. Giovanni Riina found an unexploded bomb, a deadly remnant of World War II, which had ravaged much of Europe and left its mark even on far-flung places like Sicily. Giovanni attempted to dismantle the bomb to harvest its explosives, possibly hoping to sell them for a small profit or use them to gain some advantage in a world where resources were scarce. But the bomb detonated, killing Giovanni and one of Totò's brothers. This horrific event had a profound impact on young Totò, who suddenly found himself thrust into the role of the family's provider. The trauma of this experience, coupled with the harsh realities of life in post-war Sicily, began to shape the boy into the man who would later become known as La Belva, the Beast. The explosion did more than just rob Riina of his father and brother, it also shattered whatever remained of his childhood. In a land where the state was weak and often absent, the Mafia filled the void, offering a twisted form of protection and justice. For a young boy who had just lost his father in a violent accident, the Mafia might have seemed like the only path forward, a way to seize control in a world that had shown him nothing but brutality. And so, Totò Riina began his descent into the world of organized crime, a descent that would eventually lead him to the very top of the Sicilian Mafia. By 1947, Riina had committed his first murder. At just 17 years old, he was already a killer, a brutal initiation into the Mafia that marked the beginning of his ascent through the ranks of the Corleonese clan. Under the mentorship of Luciano Leggio, a powerful and ruthless Mafia leader, Riina quickly established himself as a force to be reckoned with. Leggio saw in Riina a kindred spirit, someone who understood that in the Mafia, power was not something to be given or earned through loyalty alone, but something to be taken, often through violence. With Leggio's backing, Riina began to climb the ranks of the Mafia, learning the dark arts of intimidation, extortion, and murder. Throughout the 1950s and 60s, Riina's reputation for brutality grew. He became known as La Belva, a nickname that reflected his willingness to do whatever it took to secure his position within the Mafia. The murder of Michele Navarra in 1958 was a pivotal moment in Riina's career. Navarra had been the boss of the Corleonese clan, but Leggio and Riina saw him as an obstacle to their ambitions. By orchestrating Navarra's assassination, Leggio and Riina were able to seize control of the clan and set the stage for Riina's eventual rise to power. The assassination of Navarra was just the beginning. Riina had his sights set on something much larger than just controlling a single Mafia family. He wanted to dominate all of Sicily. Over the next 2 decades, Riina and his allies waged a brutal campaign to eliminate their rivals and expand their influence. The violence reached its peak during the Second Mafia War, a period of intense conflict in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Riina's strategy was one of total domination, and he was willing to do whatever it took to achieve it. The death toll during this period was staggering. Hundreds of people were killed, including not just mafia members, but also their families, associates, and anyone else who might pose a threat to Riina's plans. The streets of Palermo and other Sicilian towns became battlegrounds, with Riina's men carrying out hit after hit in a ruthless quest for power. But Riina's ambitions didn't stop at the boundaries of the underworld. He understood that real power came from controlling both the criminal and legitimate worlds. Throughout the 1980s, Riina expanded his influence into politics and business, forging deep connections with politicians, businessmen, and even members of the Catholic Church. In Palermo, he became a dominant force in the city's booming construction industry, using a network of front companies and corrupt officials to funnel money into the mafia's coffers. Riina's reach extended far beyond Sicily, touching the highest levels of Italian politics. One of the most infamous examples of Riina's influence in politics was his alleged connection to Giulio Andreotti, a powerful Italian politician who served as prime minister several times. Although Andreotti was eventually acquitted of charges related to his alleged mafia ties, the rumors and accusations highlighted the extent of Riina's reach and the pervasive nature of mafia influence in Italian politics. Riina's ability to blur the lines between the legal and illegal worlds was one of his greatest strengths, allowing him to build a criminal empire that was as powerful as it was secretive. But as Riina's power grew, so too did his paranoia. He knew that his position at the top was precarious, that there were always threats lurking in the shadows. To maintain his dominance, Riina employed a strategy of ruthless suppression, using fear as his primary weapon. This fear wasn't just about eliminating threats, it was about creating an atmosphere of constant fear and uncertainty. Those who crossed him knew that their fate would be swift and brutal. The peak of Riina's infamy came in 1992, with the assassinations of Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. These two judges had dedicated their lives to fighting the mafia, and their deaths sent shockwaves through Italy and the world. The killings were meant to protect Riina's empire, but they had the opposite effect. The public outrage that followed led to an unprecedented crackdown on the mafia, with the Italian government launching a massive campaign to bring Riina and his associates to justice. In January 1993, after decades of evading capture, Riina was finally arrested in Palermo. His arrest marked a significant turning point in the fight against organized crime in Italy. Riina was sentenced to life in prison, where he continued to exert influence over the mafia from behind bars. But his power was waning, and the once mighty empire he had built began to crumble. Even as his health deteriorated, Riina remained a figure of fear within the mafia. By the time of his death in 2017, at the age of 87, Riina was a shadow of his former self. But the impact of his life, the lives lost, the terror inflicted, remains a dark chapter in Sicily's history. As we reflect on the life of Totò Riina, we're left with a complex legacy. On one hand, he was a man who rose from poverty to become one of the most powerful and feared figures in Italy. On the other hand, his rise came at a tremendous cost, not just to his victims, but to himself. Riina's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the destructive power of fear. But in Riina's downfall, there is also a glimmer of hope. His capture and imprisonment were victories for the rule of law, a testament to the resilience of those who stood against the mafia. Riina's death marked the end of an era, but it also signaled the beginning of a new chapter in Sicily's history, a chapter where the mafia's grip on power was finally starting to loosen. As we leave the streets of Corleone behind, Totò Riina's story lingers, a dark shadow over a land that is still healing from the wounds of his reign. But in that shadow, there is also light, a reminder that even the darkest of nights can be pierced by the dawn of justice. And in that, there is hope, for Sicily, and for all of us.